Found the bug on a Tuesday. Not in my garden, not in the crawl space under the house, in my telephone. The old landline I've had for 31 years, sitting on the kitchen counter next to the bread box, right where my wife used to leave her grocery lists. I didn't say a word about it, not to my son, not to anyone, and 3 days later he made a mistake that confirmed everything. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm 68 years old. I spent 32 years as a claims investigator for a regional insurance company in Central Ohio, and I know what it looks like when someone is running a scheme. I've seen it 100 times. Inflated repair estimates, staged accidents, policies taken out on relatives 2 weeks before a mysterious kitchen fire. I know the signs. What I didn't know, what I never once let myself consider, was that I'd be looking at those same signs inside my own home. My wife passed in February, pancreatic cancer. We had 8 months between the diagnosis and the end, which sounds like a long time until you're living it, and then it goes like water through your hands. Her name was the kind of name that suited her perfectly. Warm, a little old-fashioned, the kind of name grandmothers have. She was 64. We'd been married 40 years. After she was gone, the house became something else. Not a home, exactly. More like a museum of the life we'd had together. I'd walk into the kitchen and see her handwriting on the notepad by the phone. A grocery list she'd never finished. And I'd just stand there. I couldn't throw it away. I still haven't. My son called in late April. He said he'd been thinking about me, worrying about me being alone out here in the house. He asked if it would be okay if he came to stay for a while, just to help out, get things in order. His marriage had ended the previous year, quietly, without much drama, he said, and he was between apartments. It made sense. It seemed like a kindness from him and toward him both. He arrived on a Friday with 2 duffel bags and a dented Honda. I made pasta. We sat at the kitchen table and talked until almost midnight, and for the first time since February, the house felt less like a museum. I should have trusted that feeling more than I trusted him. He's 41. Old enough that I'd stopped thinking of him as someone I needed to protect. Old enough that I assumed, without ever really examining the assumption, that he was just my son. Someone who loved me, who was going through a rough patch, who needed a place to land for a few months. I wasn't suspicious. Why would I be? The first month was fine. He cooked sometimes. He mowed the back lawn without being asked. He drove me to a follow-up appointment when my knee was acting up, and I didn't feel like fighting the parking garage at the medical center. Small things, good son things. The trouble, I think now, started with the paperwork. My wife had managed the household finances, not because I couldn't, but because she'd always been better at the organizational side of things, and after 32 years, you stop questioning the system that works. When she died, there was a period of months where I was simply trying to keep my head above water, the estate, the accounts, the insurance, the title on the car. My son offered to help. I let him. He sat with me at the kitchen table one afternoon, and we went through the filing cabinet together. He helped me set up online access to the joint checking account, which I'd never bothered with before because my wife always handled it online herself. He showed me how to check the balance on my phone. I thanked him. It seemed like a good afternoon. I didn't know he'd watch me type in the password. The second month, he started making phone calls in his room with the door closed. I noticed because the house is small, a 3-bedroom ranch I bought in 1991, and sound carries. I couldn't hear what he was saying, just the low murmur of his voice and the occasional pause. I didn't think much of it at first. Everyone makes private phone calls. Then I noticed the mail. We get a paper statement every month from the bank, or we used to. I realized sometime in June that I hadn't seen one in about 6 weeks. When I mentioned it to my son, he said he must have accidentally signed me up for paperless statements when we were setting up the online access. He said he'd fix it. He never did. I thought about that later, quite a bit. The thing about spending 32 years in insurance fraud investigation is that you develop a particular kind of patience. You learn that the worst thing you can do when you suspect something is to move too fast. You learn to watch, to wait, to let the other person feel like they're still in control. Because people who feel in control get comfortable, and comfortable people get careless. I am a very patient man, so when I found the device, on the second Tuesday in July, while I was untangling the cord because the phone had been cutting in and out, I sat down at the kitchen table, poured myself a glass of iced tea, and I thought it was small, smaller than a matchbook, tucked into the housing where the cord meets the base, held in place with a small strip of electrical tape, the same color as the phone's plastic casing. Someone who wasn't looking for it would never have found it. I only found it because I was fiddling with the cord at the exact angle where the light from the window caught the edge of the tape. I looked at it for a long time. Then I put the phone back exactly as it was. I did not mention it to my son. That evening he made burgers on the grill and we ate on the back porch, and I watched him the way I used to watch claimants I was about to close a case on. Relaxed, easy in his movements. He told a story about a road trip he'd taken years ago, before he was married, through New Mexico. I laughed in the right places. I asked follow-up questions. I was very good at seeming like a man who didn't know anything. I've had a lot of practice. That night I lay in bed and made a list in my head of everything I knew and everything I suspected. What I knew, there was a listening device on my telephone. My bank statements had stopped arriving. My son had access to my online banking password. What I suspected, I didn't want to say out loud yet, even to myself. The next morning, while my son was still asleep, I drove to the bank. I'm old enough that I still know my banker's name, and she's known me long enough to be discreet when I asked her to pull up the account activity for the past 90 days and print it on paper rather than showing me the screen. She did it without asking too many questions. She's a smart woman. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot and read the statements. In the past 11 weeks, $17,000 had been moved out of the joint checking account in transfers I did not recognize. Not all at once, that would have been obvious. Small amounts. $800 here, $1,200 there. One transfer for $4,000 that was labeled helpfully home maintenance. We had not had any home maintenance done. I sat there for a while. Then I drove to a sporting goods store and bought a cheap, prepaid phone with cash. I drove to the library, not my usual branch, and used their computer to look up the name of an attorney I'd met briefly at my wife's estate proceedings. I wrote down her number on a piece of paper and put it in my shirt pocket. I drove home and made lunch, and when my son came downstairs, I handed him a sandwich and asked how he'd slept. "Good," he said. "You?" "Just fine," I said. That was the Thursday. On the Saturday, I called the attorney from the prepaid phone while my son was out getting groceries. I explained the situation. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Do not move any money, do not confront him, and do not change any passwords. I'll need you to come in on Monday." I said I'd be there. On the Sunday, he made his mistake. We were sitting in the living room after dinner. He was on his phone. I was reading. He said without looking up, "Hey, did you ever get that water bill sorted out? The one that was running high a few months back?" I looked at him over my reading glasses. I had never told him about the water bill. It had been a minor thing, a small spike in the bill last winter before he'd moved in that turned out to be a slow drip in the basement utility sink. My wife and I had dealt with it in January. There was nothing in writing about it that he could have found in the filing cabinet. The only way he could have known about it was if he'd heard me talking about it on the phone. He was still looking at his screen. "Yeah," I said. "It sorted itself out." "Good," he said. And that was all. He didn't even look up. I went to bed that night with my jaw tight and my hands very still in my lap, the way I used to sit when I was about to close a case, and I didn't want the other person to see me thinking. Monday morning, I was at the attorney's office when it opened. She was thorough. She had me document the transfers, the listening device, the missing statements. She brought in a colleague who specialized in elder financial abuse. She used that phrase without hesitating, and I made myself not flinch at it. They explained my options clearly. I had two things in my favor. The first was that the account was still technically in my name alone since my wife's estate had been settled. My son had no legal access to it. The second was that I had 32 years of experience documenting exactly this kind of thing, and I had been careful. We filed a report with the county sheriff's office that afternoon. The detective I spoke with was younger than my son, with a flat, methodical way of speaking that reminded me of the better investigators I'd worked with over the years. He listened without interrupting. He asked precise questions. He said they would need a few days. I drove home and made dinner. That week I was a very good actor. I want you to understand that it cost me something, not because I felt any warmth left for what my son was doing. I was well past that, but because the performance required me to keep looking at him across the dinner table and seeing, instead of the person I'd raised, someone I was building a case against. I kept thinking about a specific summer, he must have been 9 or 10, when he'd broken a window in the garage throwing a baseball and spent an entire afternoon trying to figure out whether to tell me. He'd finally come to me after dinner, his face red, holding the baseball in both hands. I'd bought him a new ball, and we'd fixed a window together on Saturday morning. I thought about that a lot that week. On the Friday, the detective called the prepaid phone. He told me they'd done enough to proceed and asked if I was prepared for them to come to the house the following morning. I said yes. I made pancakes that Saturday. I set the table the way my wife always did, with the folded paper towels as napkins and the little ceramic pitcher of maple syrup. My son came downstairs in his socks and said it smelled good. He poured himself a coffee and sat down. The knock came at 9:15. I had known they were coming. He had not. The difference in those two facts was the entire distance between us. He looked at me when he heard the knock. Not at the door, at me. And in that look I saw something I hadn't expected. Not guilt, exactly. Something more like the moment before guilt. That fraction of a second when a person's face arranges itself around the question of how much you know. I went to the door. I won't describe the rest of it in detail. I don't particularly want to revisit it. And the details that matter are simple. They had documentation. They had access to the transfer records. They had the device which I'd left in place, which was exactly as useful to them as I'd hoped it would be. My son did not say much. He looked at me once more before they took him outside, and I didn't look away. My attorney had advised me in the days before to have someone with me when this happened. I hadn't arranged that, whether out of stubbornness or privacy or some other thing I don't have a clean name for. I'm not sure. I was alone in the house when they left. I stood at the kitchen window for a while looking at the backyard. The garden needed weeding. In the weeks that followed, I changed the account. I changed the passwords. I changed the locks. Though the detective said that wasn't strictly necessary. I went through the filing cabinet again, this time alone, and organized everything the way I'd been meaning to do since February. I also had a different conversation with my attorney, not about the case, but about the house itself, about what I wanted to happen to it eventually, about setting things up the right way, with the right protections, the way I should have done a long time ago. She was patient with me. I appreciated that. People have asked me, the few I've told, whether I saw it coming. Whether there were signs I missed. There were signs. I see that clearly now, but I think the more honest answer is that I didn't want to see them. And there's a difference. When someone you love is doing something terrible, the warning signs arrive wrapped in ordinary life, in the normal texture of Tuesday mornings and dinner conversations and small kindnesses that cost nothing. It's very easy to see what you want to see. I should know. I spent 32 years watching other people do exactly that. What I'll say is this. I'm 68 years old. I live alone in a house in central Ohio, and some nights that house is very quiet. But quiet and helpless are not the same thing. I want to be clear about that because I think people sometimes confuse them when they're talking about men and women my age. I knew what was happening. I paid attention. I moved carefully, and I documented everything, and I let the process work the way it's supposed to work. That's not a young person's story or an old person's story. That's just the story of someone who spent his whole career learning exactly how people cover their tracks and knew exactly what to look for when someone started covering theirs. My wife's grocery list is still on the notepad by the phone. The landline is gone now. I got rid of it a few weeks after everything happened. There didn't seem to be much point in keeping it. I have the prepaid phone and the cell phone my daughter-in-law gave me 3 Christmases ago that I finally started using properly. The garden is weeded. The spare bedroom is empty. I make pasta sometimes on Fridays just for myself because I like it and because 40 years of habit is a hard thing to break. I'm doing fine, and if you're watching this from somewhere, if you're my age, living alone, with people around you who know the access codes and check the mail and seem so very concerned about your well-being, I'm asking you to pay attention, not to be suspicious of everyone, not to close yourself off, just to pay attention. You've earned the right to know what's happening in your own life. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.